Evening, folks. This is the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. It is our June 16th, once a month weekly meeting in which we focus on public comment. I'm seeing folks are rolling into our meeting, and we'll let them continue to be with us. We look forward to our agenda and to hearing from folks. We will start with a roll call.
Mr. Chair. Commissioner Bogue.
Here.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Here.
Commissioner Hackett.
Here.
Commissioner McGowan. Commissioner Mesner. Commissioner Nanjapa.
Here.
And Chair Robbins.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 5 of 7 commissioners present.
Great. And just for the record, we have 5 of 7 total, 3 of 5 voting. Either way, that's a quorum. And it is the summer now, and folks are taking some time off with families. And so we'll continue to have quorums and hopefully mix it up so that we're all able to participate. I do know that Commissioners Mesner and McGowan are out this week, and I think they both pledged to watch the YouTube video to get to be informed of the public comment, which is one of the great things that we can do with the format that we have here with us now. I see we now have 21 attendees, 12 panelists. I see Director Murphy has joined us. Good to see you, Julie. We've taken the roll call. We've established a quorum. This evening we have before us, we will start with general public comment. And then we have a short opportunity for director report. We have a consent agenda item, and then we have commissioner comments. And so to start with public comment, we had folks sign up online. I think there's approximately 18 or 19 folks signed up. I also note that we appreciate, and we did receive written comment. We received written comment from Janice Brown, from Heidi Leithwood, from Tom Stumpf, from Louise Vanderkoy, and from Gary Mahaffey. Sorry if I butchered your name there, Gary. And I know the commissioners have read that comment, and we appreciate it. It gives us a chance to digest public comment, over the course of the day. And so thank you for providing written public comment. Second, with regard to public comment, I think folks know that some of the folks that have signed up, we've heard from before. Look forward to hearing from you again. We are going to elevate the time allotments to 5 minutes for each public commenter. Don't feel that you have to take the full 5 minutes, but if you need to, you have it. I'm not seeing that we have our timer. Do we have our timer with us or not? Hearings manager Thomas?
We do. I'm sharing my screen in a moment.
Okay, so we'll get the timer up. That'll give folks a chance to see what the time looks like. Once we get to the end of the time, I will remind folks that their time is up. We'll move to the next speaker. So with that, hearings manager Thomas and hearings manager Amaro, would it be easier for you guys to call folks since you've got access to who's on board with us, or do you want me to try to do that?
Chair, I will go ahead and do that just because I'll be looking for their names. I think it'll go a little smoother if that's okay with you. And I see our first person is Kate Christensen, but she does appear under Deb McNamara sometimes, so I will bring her in.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Good evening.
Good evening. I don't have the option to turn my video on, so I apologize for that. And you're right, this is Kate Christensen, not Deb. Thank you so much for hearing my comments tonight. I want to zoom out a little bit and talk about why I'm here, because I think sometimes it feels like I am not here because I think it's fun to go on Zoom and attack commissioners instead of like enjoying like dinner with my family or something like that. I am here because I am really concerned about what is happening in our state right now. We're in a extreme drought. We're experiencing a ton of climate change, wildfires. We know that emissions from oil and gas production is a huge contributor to that. And you all have so much more power than I do to change it. Like, I can make personal changes, but you all can make huge changes in how greenhouse gas is released into our atmosphere and directly impacting climate change. And I was thinking about that in relation to financial assurances and Director Murphy's presentation this morning. And she was asking us to look at the big picture and how the financial assurance rules impact Colorado. And so I was zooming out and thinking about the big picture. And one thing that I noticed that was missing from the rules were, or at least from the presentation that I saw and from the pages that I read, I haven't read them all, is references to public health, safety, and the environment, which is what SB 181 mandates that we look at. It seems to me that the lens under which the rules were written is a lens that looks at what is most convenient for operators. How is this going to impact operators? And that is one question. But another huge question is, how does this impact Coloradans? So I was zooming out and looking at the big picture. I was thinking, if I were a commissioner, how would I make financial assurances better for everybody, better for public health, safety, and environment? One of the things I was thinking about is the fact that we've had F-grade air quality for over 10 years. We are in an ozone non-attainment from the EPA. And in the rules, they talked about a fee for orphan wells. Why not a fee per well that goes into a fund for kids with asthma who live in ozone non-attainment areas? That would be a way that we can make financial assurances work for public health. Or the environment. They use so much water to frack wells, and we're in a drought. I would charge them huge fees. Like, I'm loving this idea of what I could do as a commissioner, like enormous fees for using our water during a drought. Or ozone non-attainment days. Like, there are days where they, don't drive during certain hours, make sure you don't burn a fire in the fireplace. We should also not be drilling those days. Shut it all down. If we have super poor air quality, let's not be letting the oil and gas operations contribute to that. And back to the water is so much more precious than oil. And there are all the pension funds in Canada that are investing in oil and gas companies that are fracking Colorado, and then we send that oil to China. Like, the vast majority of the oil that we produce gets exported, and you guys all know that. So why are we letting Canada profit from us destroying our air and water and then sending all that to be burned in China? Like, nothing against Canadians and Chinese, they're fine. I just think that we're bending over backwards at their benefit and destroying our climate. So I think that the socialized costs of oil and gas are not taken into consideration with the financial assurances. And I would ask the commission look at the bigger picture rather than just how is this impacting oil and gas operators? Like, how is this industry impacting the entire state? How are we socializing these costs? And then let's make them pay for it. So as these rulemakings go on, I would ask them, I know you're not gonna use any of my harebrained ideas. I totally get that. It was more of a thought experiment to say, how else can we be looking at this instead of through the lens of just the operators and what is most convenient for them? So I appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Ms. Christensen, for appearing with us this evening and providing your commentary.
Next up will be Kate Merlin, and she'll be followed by Jonathan Singer.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Ms. Merlin.
Thank you so much. Thank you for letting us speak tonight. I wanted to take the chance to make some public comments about the issues that we raised yesterday in the 5 complaints that we filed with the director and then brought to your attention. I wish we could have filed these a while ago, but the data that we uncovered really had to be carefully culled from your COGCC database. Not only did the wells have to be examined for the status dates and their dates of mechanical integrity testing, if any, but we also had to examine the entire file for each well to determine whether there had been extenuating circumstances. In our review, we discovered that some idle wells had been plugged years ago and that some producing wells are in fact idle, that inspections, warnings, and even NOAVs had been issued to operators without the resulting compliance actions. Failed inspections did not seem to automatically trigger reinspection. Warnings did not seem to automatically trigger NOAVs despite lack of compliance actions. NOAVs were issued and may have led to a penalty that recorded in a different part of the database, but from what we might see in a file, an NOAV could have been issued years ago, and today the well would still be missing evidence of either compliance or plugging. Production reports remained missing, MITs remained missing, other required filings were missing. Operators often filed notices of intent to perform certain actions, and then in the files, we might find affirmative evidence that the noticed activities did not in fact ever occur. We know that both regulating these wells and complying with these regulations is a very complex and technical task. And it may be that every one of the violations that we believe that we found has some plausible explanation. But when we put these facts together, it painted a fairly grim picture of the inner workings of the oversight and enforcement at a ground level. Only a year ago, the state auditor discovered that hundreds of operators had failed to file over 50,000 production reports that the state depends on to get their severance taxes. If the agency doesn't have accurate data, it can't do its job. And if it can't do its job, it's going to be the people and not the industry that suffers as a result. I wanted to bring forward 2 examples from the active operator spreadsheet, which you shared with us on the Financial Assurances Rulemaking website. And these are just 2. I mean, like I mentioned before, it takes a long time to analyze these things because you have to go in and look at it at a very granular level. But just for some examples, 31 operating, operator 200502 is listed having just 25 wells with 0 producing wells, with 23 shut-in wells and 2 temporarily abandoned wells. But according to COGCC, 31 operating has 124 wells with 0 producing wells, and they're all shut in or temporarily abandoned. Its financial assurances are $125,000 with 0 inactive well bonding. So just to reiterate, that's 124 versus 25. Red Willow Production, operator 81295, is listed as having 267 wells with 198 wells producing, 63 wells shut in, and 8 wells temporarily abandoned. Or sorry, 3 wells temporarily abandoned. According to COGCC, however, there's 671 non-plugged wells, including 478 producing wells, not 198. 170 wells shut in, not 63, and 8 temporarily abandoned wells, not 3. These are just 2 operators from the active operator list that don't match COGCC records by hundreds of wells. We found errors and omissions in the orphan database too. We found undercounting of the number of wells from a particular operator. And there are 115 orphan projects listed as complete by the OWP, of which only 12 had spending on the projects reported. The COGCC has said before that it's a form-driven regulatory agency, but forms are not being filed and the data is not being entered and irregularities are not being noticed or addressed. It looks like this is causing real-world effects and regulatory outcomes. With respect, I do not think this agency should be contemplating the adoption of new rules which require active oversight and enforcement activity driven by highly detailed analysis of production levels or the number of wells with a particular status that are owned or transferred. I'm available to speak with any of you at any time about the issues that I've believe that we've identified and flagged. And again, I thank you for your listening and thank you for the extra time. It really helped me make my comments tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Merlin, for the comments this evening. I know that we did receive 5 complaints and they will be processed accordingly at commission. Look to see if Director Murphy would like to respond at all to that, noting that the complaints are in your inbox.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, that would be kind of the sum total of my responses. We have received the complaints. We will work through this issue and Ms. Merlin will be in contact with you as we do that.
Great. Next, Hearings Manager Thomas.
Next up is Jonathan Singer, and that'll be followed by Jan Rose.
Good evening, Commissioners and Director. Thank you for allowing me to have a little bit of time today. My name is Jonathan Singer. I'm a former elected official and resident here in Longmont. And really what I wanted to do today, without repeating too much, is really lift up and uphold what Ms. Merlin just expressed. With this preliminary research, the question is whether or not there's just a simple misunderstanding and misreporting of data or incomplete data that actually exists somewhere. In which case, I hope that the commission is able to stand up and make sure that we get the right information into the right hands at the right time and place. But if not, these mechanical integrity tests are incredibly critical. And if we have idle or abandoned wells that are improperly abandoned or sitting idle, that presents a huge risk to our neighbors that might be in neighboring communities to where these wells exist. So in light of, really making sure that we have complete transparency and accountability, it's my hope that the commission is really able to step up and make sure that the right actions are taken. And if there is a true deficit in what is actually happening right now, then I think this actually presents itself as an excellent opportunity for the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, the Department of Natural Resources, and other groups such as the Office of Just Transition to take the opportunity to make sure that the correct wellbore integrity and mechanical integrity tests are actually done, and perhaps even providing new jobs through either contracts or new state workers to protect the public and make sure that we're doing things the right way the first time. So with that, I'll yield back the remainder of my time, and hopefully others will be able to take their time to chime in.
Thank you, Rep. Singer. Appreciate you being with us. And again, we'll take the complaints and process them accordingly. They were received yesterday, and our staff will be looking into it and coordinating their findings with Ms. Merlin and her group. Mr. Thomas, I think you mentioned that Jan Rose was on deck, so maybe she's in the batter's box now.
Yep, she has just been admitted.
I am in the batter's box. Thank you, Director Robbins. Thank you, Commissioners. Thank you, Hearing Officer Thomas, for taking the opportunity, giving us the opportunity this evening to speak generally to the Commission. I don't want to use my 5 minutes, and I don't want to belabor the points I belabored on the 1st of April in the informational docket. But my concerns with the Orphaned Well program, which you may recall from my presentation, are similar to those expressed by Ms. Merlin, in that I'm having difficulty aligning the paperwork with the reports. And I actually produced slides for that informational docket that said, this chart doesn't match data. And I looked at things like there are 454 sites and wells that are in the planned or in progress list, but there are only 250 that are included in the annual Orphan Well report. And where did the rest of the sites and wells go? And this struck me particularly today because Director Murphy mentioned in outlining the draft rules for the 700 series that we were looking at a $200 per well moving forward annual fee to fund orphaned wells. And some simple back of the napkin math indicates that's 50,000 active wells. I counted 27,000 inactive in some method wells, of which only 450 were considered high priority enough to be placed into the Orphaned Well program to begin with. So my question related to Ms. Merlin's submission to the informational docket on May 25th was related to what the purpose of financial assurances should be. And I want to echo and literally quote what she stated in her document. The goal of financial assurance is to prevent strategic orphanage, where certain assets are transferred, idled, or simply allowed to remain active while essentially non-productive, rather than being properly plugged and abandoned. And as you know, some of my recommendations regarding the Orphaned Well Fund and the status of orphaned wells will require legislative responses, and I understand that feedback. I accept it, I appreciate it, and I really do hope that I have your support moving forward as I seek legislative solutions to this problem that are over and above the financial assurances rulemaking. So I want to assure you that I accepted that feedback. I will be filing for party status. I will ensure that my pre-hearing statements and my testimony are relevant to the rules now that we have draft content. And I want to encourage the commission in the development of these rules to please ensure that all of the forms that back financial assurances are publicly available, are available in some method that is provided a usable user interface. You know, it's going to be an interesting process, and I kind of feel sorry for Ms. Amaro because you're going to have parties trying to learn the online system for e-filings, and I think it's going to be a really challenging effort. And I believe this whole thing is public knowledge. It is the role of the commission to protect public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. And as such, we, the public, need to understand the status of every well in the inventory in the state of Colorado. So thank you so much for paying particular attention to the dotted I's and the crossed T's.
Thank you, Ms. Rose, for taking time to be with us this evening. Mr. Thomas, who do we have next?
Next is Doug Henderson.
And who's on deck?
And that'll be followed by Marie Venner.
Okay, great.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, Mr. Henderson. Good evening.
Yes, yeah, good evening. Thank you, Director Robbins and Commissioners. I'm Doug Henderson, a resident of Larimer County, speaking for the Larimer Alliance for Health, Safety, and Environment, a coalition of county residents and organizations. Larimer County's air quality is simply terrible, due largely to oil and gas industry emissions. The American Lung Association gives Larimer County a grade F for air quality. In 2019, our air quality was ranked number 24 worst in ozone pollution of over 200 cities in the US. In 2020, our air quality drop was lower, number 19 worst in the US. The NCAR FRAPPE study found conclusively that oil and gas industry emissions are the major driver of unhealthy air quality in the Northern Front Range, including Larimer County. Improving our air quality depends on reducing emissions from oil and gas facilities. We in Larimer also face the mega problem of climate change and all its ramifications. The impacts are not in some distant future, they are immediate and close at home. Last summer, the biggest wildfire in Colorado's history was directly west of where I live near Fort Collins, wreaking both immediate and lasting impacts. It's only mid-June now, but this week we are sweltering, and almost every day is an air alert, very bad air day. What kind of canary in the coal mine does Colorado's officialdom need to wake up, get serious, and take meaningful action to rapidly reduce harmful emissions and greenhouse gases such as methane? It is time, past time, that COGCC takes serious action to stop harmful, often illegal emissions from oil and gas facilities and sites. These emissions happen at virtually all oil and gas facilities, causing damage to people's health, ruining our air quality, and doing grave harm to our environment and climate. Colorado expects operators to self-report and be honest about emissions, but the real honest truth is that the industry lies about its emissions. And in spite of this open secret, there has been very little monitoring, investigation, and enforcement by the state or local authorities. One example here in Larimer County. Investigators with the organization Earthworks recently documented emissions at an oil and gas facility just northeast of Fort Collins in Larimer County. The investigation was triggered by a report from a nearby resident who has experienced health problems for years from this facility: headaches, nausea, nosebleeds, possibly long-term damage. The facility has been leaking harmful and illegal emissions for years. Also, the operator was cited for violations a number of times over the years, but the leaks continued and local residents suffered the health effects. It took repeated imaging documentation by Earthworks and reports to the state in the first months of this year before the operator finally made repairs that stopped the leaks. Without that, the facility would be leaking now. The operator would be denying there was a problem, and authorities would be relying on self-reporting and trusting the operator fix leaks, which wouldn't happen. Unfortunately, this is typical oil and gas business as usual, how the industry has operated for decades. COGCC needs to get serious about stopping harmful emissions. Every oil and gas site needs monitoring adequate to identify harmful emissions and to report in real time to be useful for addressing problems when they occur. Technology is readily available to do this, but of course, the industry prefers monitoring and reporting that provides results weeks or months later and is not public because it's useless for really ending leaks and holding polluters responsible. Local residents and emergency responders have a right to know what's being emitted available on a public website with alert options so that people can know when a dangerous emission occurs near them and take precautions. The problem of emissions isn't only with active wells and facilities, it's also inactive wells, including properly plugged and abandoned wells and wells that have simply been abandoned. Mechanical integrity tests are needed and necessary to ensure that inactive wells are not a danger to public health and safety, not harming the environment, and not causing climate damage, possibly huge damage. Credible research points to idle inactive wells and abandoned wells as significant sources of methane emissions. But without integrity tests of these wells, there is no way to ensure that they aren't leaking methane and other harmful pollutants, and no way to know if some may be super emitters that are contributing disproportionately to climate change. We ask COGCC to put more attention and effort to emissions monitoring and reporting, to enforcement that serves as an effective deterrent, and to ensuring that mechanical integrity tests are conducted to identify emissions and stop them. We encourage that this happens sooner rather than later for protection of public health, safety, and environment, and because rapid reduction of greenhouse gases sooner, not later, is crucial to maintaining a livable climate and planet. Thank you for your attention and your action on rapid reduction of emissions.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson. Mr. Thomas?
Next up is Marie Venner, followed by Guillermo Serna.
Does my video come on too?
We do not have your video.
Okay.
We hear you though.
Okay. My name is Marie Brenner. I'm here from Colorado Small Businesses and also statewide faith organizations, including Call to Action, which has been around for over 40 years. Thank you, commissioners, for working on financial assurances. The public's questions are very simple. Do the drillers and owners have the financial resources or not? This is a yes/no question, and it is a critical one. Are you getting that information for all of them? Also, is the state requiring full bonding for each well? No exceptions. This is the fiscally prudent thing to do and absolutely essential. Don't leave us hanging. The state and everything it funds are on the line. You've heard about the insides of these companies from Harmon & Cummings who work there. Extractors take care of themselves, and that money largely flows out of state. You're here to take care of us, the people of Colorado, and make sure Colorado is not left on the hook, that the people of Colorado are protected. Is the insurance enough to cover it? There's insurance and then there's insurance. Is the insurance enough to cover it? The way to make sure we don't have to cover it from our state budget is to have each wellhead give the state a cash bond for the full average amount of closing the well, $270,000 or so. This is not excessive. It is reasonable in what should be required to protect Coloradans. Senator Michael Bennet often says, my kids don't want to pay for this. Well, that's what we're looking at with all of these wells, a lot of liability. Colorado has 120,000 wells. Less than 50,000 of those are operating. That's 70,000 wells to deal with, and your job is to get the industry to maximally pay for it, not to try to keep this dying industry going by not taking their bond. You're working for us. We realize that this is a switch for longer-term commissioners like Commissioner Robbins, but let's be clear. The people of Colorado need and expect you to do your job. There is great danger in delaying any of this. It needs to be undertaken with deliberate speed. The longer you let it go, the worse it gets. Now, for the working wells, as you know, it is very important for there to be processes in place to verify the accuracy of the amount of oil and gas extracted, and thus the amount of severance taxes paid? Is a report tracking and fine imposition system in good shape now? You've heard before of the 420 operators actively producing during calendar years 2016 through 2018. 316 operators submitted over 1,200 incomplete monthly well reports and or failed to submit as many as over 50,000 required monthly well reports. The commission did not impose penalties on any of the operators for failing to report. Had the commission imposed the fine allowed, these 316 operators would have been subject to $308 million in penalties for the violations, which would also provide some more staff around the office, right? Your rules currently require operators to maintain calibration information related to measurement equipment. The results of the calibration review are not documented as systematically and transparently as they should be and regularly reported to the public, along with continuous monitoring results. And we are still waiting to find out about cumulative effects. We know you have a lot of work. Thanks for making sure it gets done. We are enduring F-grade air quality and have been enduring that for 10 years. The ideas you heard today about making additional fees for air and water quality and use are good ones. We do need to stop drilling during the summer, or at least on high air pollution days. This is what would be fair for Coloradans, and this is what the people of Colorado want, the 99%. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas?
Mr. Chair, we were unable to locate Mr. Serna at this time, so we will move on to Lisa, followed by Renee Millard-Chacon. If Mr. Serna appears, we will squeeze him back into the schedule.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. I just want to tell you thank you for being here tonight to let us voice our opinions. First of all, I would like to bring a concern to the forefront. We all know about the fire in Bennett a couple weeks ago and the firefighters' response. I'm going to quote from the article that was written. Adams County Sheriff's Office closed the road at East Quincy Avenue and Watkins Road is also closed 3 miles north of East Quincy. There are no houses within at least a mile radius of the site, so there was no evacuations. They closed down roads for 3 miles from that fire, and a mile radius, they wanted to make sure there were no houses and people around. How in the world are we still letting these companies drill close to businesses and houses because they're grandfathered in, because their applications were put in before 181? It is irresponsible when I drive down the street and I see how close a brand new well site is to the Adams County government building. If something like this were to happen in Adams County, how many lives are going to be put in danger because they are so close to the drill sites? Another issue I have is the fact that that fire started at 1:45 p.m. and the firefighters started fighting it at 7 o'clock. It says the sheriff's office and the hazmat bomb squad were on the site. The fire is too dangerous for fire crews to attack. So how in the world are we letting something that has this type of hazardous material in our neighborhoods and still close to homes? It says right here, there are some hazardous materials involved, and that's concerning firefighters right now. So they're taking it very slowly. How in the world are you letting these wells go into neighborhoods if even firefighters are too afraid to fight them the way they were? Took 6 hours for them to even start fighting the fire. And I'm going to piggyback on some of these other comments because I have them written down. If citizens in this state are on water restriction because of the drought, why isn't this industry under restriction as well? Did you know in Fountain, Colorado, they have stopped developing down there because they don't have enough water to sustain more homes and more people moving there. It is irresponsible to allow this industry to waste our most valuable resource. You can see that at Lake Mead. We are in a drought and we cannot drink oil. We can only drink water. Not to mention the fact that the companies that combined this month and all the money that they're going to be making is also going to be subsidizing the Canadian pension plans. This industry touts how much they do for the state of Colorado, but it feels like they're making more money for other countries than they are for us. So I'm tired of hearing this industry always talking about, oh, we do all of these things for Colorado. Look at all the things we do. When they're subsidizing Canadian pension funds. Your responsibility is our health and safety to the citizens and to our environment. And allowing this industry to continue to deplete our most valuable resource is unconscionable. There are people in Adams County who are staunch Republicans who are even against fracking because one mistake made to their water source, which a lot of them are on well water, is going to doom them. We are on an aquifer in Adams County. If you mess up our water, we are done. We are going to be worse than Flint because you cannot fix an aquifer that's contaminated. I implore you to please listen to the firemen who say these fires at these locations are too dangerous for them to fight and take 6 hours to actually start fighting the fire, and keep it out of our neighborhood. Keep it away from our homes and away from our businesses. Drive through Adams County and see what they're doing and seeing how they're putting our lives in danger. I implore you, take a trip out here. I doubt very seriously you guys are paying attention to actually where these sites are in comparison to where homes and people and schools and businesses and government buildings are. Do what's right. Get them out of our neighborhoods and away from our businesses and schools, and keep our water safe.
Thank you for your comments, Lisa. Mr. Thomas?
We are unable to locate Mr. Serna or Miss Renee Chacon at this time, so we will go ahead and move on to JD Roybal, followed by Luz Molina.
Am I on?
You're on, Mr. Roybal. We can hear you. Go ahead.
No, what I'm going to say is it may seem like it's not really productive with what's on here, but I really mean it from my heart. And I would really appreciate if you just let me have the time.
You got 5 minutes, go for it.
But before I start, I would like to comment on the idea of the setbacks. One thing that happened here in Weld County, primarily Windsor, is they have the setback for the oil industry themselves. They say you cannot build next to a house, you have to be X amount of distance apart. However, what happened is the way they got around that is a developer was in fact able to develop next to, and I can show you sites that they're actually one house lot away from an actual structure, primarily houses. So I would caution against that. And then now where I was going to be, I mean, I know it was already mentioned what the mission statement was, but I'd like to just repeat it again, just so we keep mindful of what we're actually doing here. And also as a point of introduction, you may not realize this, but I've been involved within the government for a long time. I've been on the planning commission, done a lot of stuff, parks and trail, and quite frankly, I even ran for town board. So I understand what this entails. But within the COGCC mission statement, it is to regulate the development and production of natural resources of oil and gas in the state of Colorado in a manner that protects public health, safety, welfare, environment, wildlife, and resources. And again, we need to stay grounded in this because as we endeavor to do this work, it's easy to get lost in the legalities. It's easy to forget what the true purpose of why we are here. Now, I asked this question rhetorically, but did you see the orange moon last night? It was really quite reminiscent of catastrophic end time scenarios. And the heat wave and other related weather scenarios are directly in line with the catastrophes that await us all as was foretold by science years and years ago. Remember, science have already been warning us of this. During the pandemic, the Zoom events have allowed for a front row seat as the degradation of our democratic system. We the people pay the wages of government employees, governmental organizations, and we the people pay the price in human suffering as the USA is commanded by an oligarch. And here I ask this really deeply, and I mean this from the heart. I ask for at least 1 minute of my time in silence for the people who have died, are imprisoned, and who are suffering the consequences of industrialization, primarily the poor and people of color, as well as indigenous peoples around the world, including the many brave women and mothers who are disproportionately risking it all as they stand front and center on the front lines. Again, I ask just for 1 minute in silence.
We will do that. Mr. Roybal, would you like to wrap up then?
Buenas noches y todo.
Thank you for being with us.
All right, Mr. Chair, I believe I've located Mr. Serna on phone, so I will bring him in. Next up would be Shayna Oliver, unless someone else that we've missed has become available.
Mr. Serna, if you're in the phone that ends in 32, if you could unmute yourself, we'd like to hear from you. Mr. Thomas, do you have him unmuted on your end?
Yes, I've asked him to unmute. Unfortunately, I don't see any change. Mr. Serna, I'm asking you to unmute, so you should get a prompt.
Might be tough to see the prompt on a phone, maybe is the problem. Oh, there we go.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. Serna, we can hear you. Good job.
Thank you so much. I want to thank you for adding a couple of minutes here. You know, in all these meetings that we're having, we haven't been heard. And I know that you have this hard questions that you have to answer to when you make recommendations. But back when, the only time we really, and the community really felt good, especially here in Commerce City, and we were talking to the city council, was when we met one-to-one in a room, okay, for about 2-3 months, and we discussed what the community wanted, because they wanted us to participate. And I know that we have 3 minutes, but people cannot, let's say, converse on the weekly basis if you're going to do what has to be done, and for the governor to receive, and the Senate and the House and on down the line, the rules and regulations on both sides of the line, they seem to have conquered the fact that it was a good time to do what has to be done. And this goes from the top down, from the governor on down, because we weren't going to meet. We were just talking, and nobody was seeing how people really feel. I participated as an individual volunteering for 13 years on the school board here, and we were having problems. But until we sat down with the community as a whole, we were really not being able to advance. It's not just you. Please don't take it personal. I just want everybody to understand that this is a fact, that it's Colorado. When we're adding 70 or maybe even more statewide, but in Adams County adding 70 more wells in perspective, whether that's the right number or not. And our people, our representatives here in Adams County and in the cities are not listening to us. That's why you were formed, in a sense, so that we could get a clear conscience that you did everything that you could to represent us. And I know you can, on both sides, whether you work for the oil companies or whether you represent the governor. But please, we have to start looking at the future. We can't just be idle and ignore the fact, like when I was hearing on the phone, that it's a thing of the past and we got to deal with it. And we're not dealing with it when we keep doing what has to be done for this whole world, for God's sake. They just met, the president just met. And everybody's concern is, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? We have to, when I say we, I include you, to help us give you some of the right answers to the public, to the community that are going to be affected. The 1 minute of the death should have included your workers in perspective, because you're okaying it to be done. Another 5 minutes for the ones that have died in the oil companies since the beginning. And we kept putting it aside. That's what we're trying to do. So we don't have deaths. So we don't have quarrels. And we can keep going as a nation and as a state and communities and trust what is being done. When things happen and we
Serna,
don't
your time is up.
listen to it, okay. Well, thank you very much, and I hope that you are hearing what the community are saying. And I wish you luck.
Thank you. Thank you for presenting to us.
You're welcome.
Chair, the next available person in the chat to speak is Steve Douglas, to be followed by Christy Douglas.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Douglas, we can hear you.
Thank you. Good evening, commissioners for the COGCC. Thanks for giving everyone 5 minutes. Not that I'll maybe not take 5 minutes, but I was looking at some of the headlines today. One says Metro Denver, Metro Denver, 4 columns rise up the list of worst U.S. cities for air pollution. It says Denver metro area ties with Salt Lake City area as the 8th worst for ground level ozone. Earlier today, EPA had a listening session, so they wanted to hear people about methane gases and overall what's happening around the country. It wasn't just Colorado, it was people calling in from all over the country. And some of these stories were really bad. And it just breaks my heart how we have all these regulations and we, look for our leaders at the Capitol to come up with laws that are going to help everyone out, not just one party, because when it comes to clean air and water, it affects everyone. And we need to look at that, look to the future, but we have to enact those laws and those rules and regulations now. And me being a former city council member, when it comes to regulations, the regulations that I wanted in the books were to make it very hard for oil and gas to come in and drill. If you could get through those regulations that were laid out, then you could drill. But it would have been impossible for that to happen. Well, I didn't get the support for that. So instead, we kicked the can down the road and the new council takes over. And, it always comes up, there's new people that get elected. They don't know, they don't have a history, they don't have the knowledge. And some things get passed and some things don't. Lucky for council member Susan Noble, she has stood strong for Commerce City, which I really appreciate. And, for the citizens to come out as well, so far, knock on wood, there's no permits that have been permitted yet in Commerce City. We have so many issues. Rocky Mountain Wildlife Refuge, the arsenal, history of that. We don't need any drilling, no vibration, nothing to upset that land for at least 3 to 5 miles out. We have Bar Lake that used to be a dumping ground for sewage for Denver, and they had to clean that up. It's not 100% clean, but they were tasked to clean that up by the EPA. And then we have a landfill out here that emits methane gas. It's not as high as some states because we're not as a wet state, we're more of a dry state. And then they also take in fracking fluid to help the residual amount of fracking fluid, what comes up, the residual, and they use that to weigh their products down. So they're trying to get 100% or in the 90s of no air gaps. So when they fill that land in with the refuge, you're gonna have those issues. But there's just so many things happening, and what I see is we've been dancing back and forth on this. It's like going to a dance party and you waiting for that last dance song to come over, because when that happens, it's over. And so it just really bogs my mind that we enact regulations, but same thing keeps happening. So it's like, all we can do is voice our opinion. Hopefully regulations are put in forward to prevent any oil and gas, because Colorado's screwed. We are doomed. It's a nightmare. I mean, they said the air quality is so bad that someone with asthma problems could just have really bad lung problems. So I know 5 minutes is up. Thank you.
Mr. Douglas. Ms. Douglas?
Yes, I am here. Thank you.
You too have 5 minutes. Go for it.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for hearing us tonight. And thank you so much for voting to add on a couple extra minutes in the evening sessions that you offer. So know that the public really appreciates that. My name's Christy Douglas. I serve as the co-chair for NRCC, which is North Range Concerned Citizens. And as you know, it's about all volunteer group. And we're just active citizens who basically, we know our house is on fire. And so we're trying to do something about it. We're out of Commerce City, which is in Adams County. Commerce City is the home to Suncor Refinery, the Rocky Mountain Arsenal, which is a Superfund site. And as Guillermo said earlier, we've been fighting off fracking coming into our neighborhoods for a really long time. We did sit down with the industry and different authority figures, and we managed to dodge the bullet, I guess, for the last 12 years. So we would definitely welcome that dialogue again. All day long, yesterday and today, I've been listening into the EPA meetings, the hearings, and wow. I heard heart-wrenching stories come from people all across the United States. Stories about abnormal severe weather, signs of the climate crisis, talk of climate catastrophe. I heard from pediatricians, physicians, healthcare professionals, scientists. But more than anything, I heard from people who are suffering from rare cancers that are coming from the same populations, from the same neighborhoods, and they don't know where they're coming from. Premature births, low birth weights, birth defects, lots of stories about asthma. I heard stories of severe disfigurements of children who were born with birth defects who live around the sites. I heard from people in Utah, Pennsylvania, mostly Southwest Pennsylvania, Ohio, Oklahoma, North Dakota. So many stories from New Mexico, Montana, Wyoming, so many stories from Texas, California. It was either West Virginia or Virginia. I couldn't tell what my notes said. So many stories from Louisiana. I heard about people who died from cancer. A guy who was building his dream home, and his daughter told the story, and he watched them frack. The site was called Big Daddy whatever. Well, it was in Pennsylvania, and he watched them frack and not having any concern for it. And then he developed a rare cancer, and she saw his health deteriorate and go from a strapping man who walked her down the aisle just months before that, and he died. And all these people, what they were doing was seeking help from the EPA. And you know why? Because they couldn't get help at the local or state level in their own states. What is wrong with this picture? I don't get it. The people that this stuff is happening to, they're not being heard unless they're given a platform. And they need to come and chime in, and you need to listen to those people. And we can do it on Zoom. And they can come and you can hear their stories. It was heart-wrenching. I just really appreciate you giving the public an opportunity to speak. I thank you for the time tonight, but you've got to start listening to the public and not to the people who are giving you directions to say, we have to frack more because that's what we have to do. It's ridiculous. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Douglas. Mr.
Chair.
Thomas?
Yes,
ahead.
next up we have Randy Webb to be followed by Sonia Skakic Scrim. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly.
This is Randy Webb. Can you hear me?
We can, Ms. Webb.
Great. I'm a resident of Aurora and a volunteer for 10 years with the grassroots group What the Frack Arapahoe. As you know, all wells must be plugged for health and safety. But for the sake of non-industry people listening, I'll say briefly that when an oil or gas well reaches the end of its lifespan, it must be plugged. But if it's left unplugged, then for years the well might leak toxic chemicals into groundwater and emit methane, carbon dioxide, and other pollutants into the air. There are about 60,000 active and inactive wells in Colorado. The COGCC's figures for plugging, that's your figures, are an average cost of $82,500 per well, which is much lower than the climate think tank Carbon Tracker's numbers of $140,000 per well. But using your figures, the overall cleanup would cost nearly $5 billion. Of course, the industry is legally required to pay this. However, the money that was available to the state early last spring, according to High Country News, from oil and gas companies operating in Colorado would cover less than 5% of the plugging cost, which is why COGCC has been tasked with revamping financial assurances, mainly in the form of bonds. Obviously, the current tiered system isn't working, especially since drillers with more than 100 wells statewide are capped at $100,000 for reclamation, which might cover one well. In my opinion, it should be $8,250,000 in bonds, not in cash, for just 100 wells, because that's simply the math when using your conservative figure of an average $82,500 per well. Back in 2017, the COGCC yourselves advised that the average cost of plugging wells and cleaning up drilling sites exceeded available financial assurance by 14 times. It should also be noted that for years now, the oil and gas industry has been in decline, and many companies have declared bankruptcy, including many in Colorado. I want to thank you for your work discussing many options to the current tiered system, and in light of the Industry Association, COGA's warning, quote, "When it comes to financial assurance for current or future wells, we need to ensure that the potential solution does not create an even bigger problem by raising the cost of doing business in Colorado for small businesses." So I urge that you require the larger businesses with, say, 100 active or inactive unplugged wells to get busy plugging inactive wells with a timeline reported to you, and that you raise their financial assurance bonds to about $8 million. Finally, I urge that you declare a moratorium on new well permits, on extensions, and on any changes that might have a possibility of the slightest negative impact, just until, at a minimum, Colorado's available assurance no longer exceeds, at a minimum, the average cost of plugging wells and well sites and facilities. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us this evening. Mr. Thomas?
Next up is Sonia Skakic Scrim, followed by Tess Doherty.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. My name is Sonia Skakic Scrima. In 2011, I founded the group What the Frack Arapahoe, and we're still active, as you heard from Randy, one of our grassroots members. And I wanted to address the topic of financial assurances tonight. Back in 2012, I believe it was, I attended a COGCC meeting in order to voice my concerns about a permit application in Aurora. And during that meeting, the centerpiece was a presentation to the commission by either COGA or API of a report that they had commissioned through the CU School of Business regarding the financial pluses, the revenues and jobs and so on that are provided by, that they estimated are provided by oil and gas. And after listening to a summary of the report, I recall that I gave up at least one of the minutes that I wanted to use of those 3 minutes that I had, just to point out that as a business owner, that report was very spurious. It only looked at revenues. It only looked at the positives, and it had no accounting whatsoever of any of the costs of oil and gas. And to some degree, we're still in that position in Colorado. There's been tremendous progress in terms of the new COGCC regs and the new rulemakings under SB 181, change up of the composition of the commission and so on. But until you address the financial assurance in a truly accountable manner that accounts for the full costs that oil and gas pose to Colorado residents, we need that done sorely. And since you're considering that at this time, I would ask you to pass prudent and stringent measures where the bonds that are required are not the blanket bonds that you currently require, but are according to the suggestions that have been made by Colorado Rising and 350.org that would actually account for the life cycle costs of the wells. That's basic business. That has to be present, that full accountability for covering life cycle costs. And another aspect of costs that some people have pointed out this evening are the health costs. The health costs of oil and gas near habitation to residents are costs that are currently essentially sacrificial health costs. They're not accounted for in any way. And there needs to be such an accounting, an estimation of such costs to residents, to their health expenses, etc., and to address that in COGCC's regs. Otherwise, it's straight out human sacrifice with no accountability whatsoever. And of course, the same applies regarding climate. The primary impact of climate change in Colorado is, of course, water scarcity increasing. And that is one of the primary, sorry, the seconds were whizzing by. I was wondering what was happening there. There is no accounting for the costs for climate change in terms of associated fires, water shortages, cost to farmers, loss of income from their increased, water costs, increased water costs for individuals. It's time to do a full accounting of what the costs are of oil and gas and to make them address those costs which they created. They can no longer count on Coloradans cleaning up after them and taking hits to their health, to their business, to their farming ability, etc., with no accountability. So I urge you to stringently create stringent financial assurances that begin to address all of these costs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Skagich-Scrum. We appreciate you being with us and for your comments. Tess Daugherty is next, is that right?
Yes, at this point, Mr. Chair, I have not been able to locate Tess Daugherty, Shayna Oliver, Luz Molina, or Renee Millard Chacon in the chat. So that would conclude the public comment list at this time.
Okay. What we'll do is we'll move on to consent agenda, commissioner comments, and perhaps look one last time, and then we can see where we're at. So with that, commissioners, we are at consent agenda. We had one matter, I believe, on consent. And we also had a hearing officer recommendation that if we take no action, it would become an order of the commission. Does anyone have questions on either of those matters? And if not, I think we're looking for a motion from either Commissioner Nanjapa or Commissioner Gonzalez on the consent agenda.
Chair Robbins, I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Great. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of consent agenda signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Consent agenda carries. We didn't have any discussion around recommended order. That will become an order of commission. At this time, we are at commissioner comments. Do anyone, including Commissioner Hackett and Commissioner Bogue, have comments for us this evening?
Chair Robbins, I just want to acknowledge the work that staff put into the draft rules for financial assurance on the first pass that came out yesterday. I think that there's a really good starting point there for our discussions and our deliberations going forward. And I look forward to getting input from stakeholders on how we can best move forward and solidify some good rules for Colorado.
Hear, hear. Agree completely. Great work, staff. We've got a lot of reading to do too. There's a 74-page statement of basis and purpose along with the rules. Commissioner Nanjapa, I saw you unmuted.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Gonzalez. I fully agree. I think it represents a lot of good work and good thought. And as Director Murphy mentioned this morning, and Chair Robbins did as well, that we're just at the beginning of this process. And for those of you who participated this evening and didn't hear the overview this morning, really encourage you to hear the video and especially some of the dates that pertain to how public can make their comments and provide them to us. Because we are interested in hearing your thoughts and appreciate those that were shared this evening as well. And I just wanted to just quickly note about the comment that was made by Mr. Roybal, I believe, regarding the what we know as reverse setbacks, which is where we may have a setback or a local government may have a setback provision for the location of an oil and gas well that may be away from homes or residences or schools, et cetera. But after that well has been permitted, it is no longer our jurisdiction for what gets developed and what distance from that well things can be developed. So to your point, Mr. Roybal, I think this is a concern that I personally have, and but it is not within our purview, and I encourage you to continue talking to your local government and others that may be able to address this, because this is a challenge, even with our new rules that I think we're going to continue to face. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Nanjapa. Yeah, there was a good presentation this morning by staff. Excuse me, on the rules, and you can see that on our YouTube page. Any further comments? Commissioner Hackett.
Thank you, Chair Robbins. And to follow up on the comments about thanking staff and Director Murphy for the presentation this morning, just so folks are aware, because oftentimes you don't see the behind the scenes stuff that goes on. Of course, obviously myself and other commissioners will be diving deeply into these rules and putting some thought into those. But just so everyone's aware, I'll also be sharing those rules with my colleagues in the CDPHE's Air Pollution Control Division, Water Quality Control Division, and Hazardous Materials and Waste Management Division to see what types of questions or comments they have. And I just highlight that for a couple of reasons, just to, of course, note that obviously assuring adequate financial assurances and proper cleanup of oil and gas sites is critically important to CDPHE, but also to highlight the fact that this is just one of the many areas where our agencies are working together and supporting each other's efforts. And I did kind of have a quick question for, I think maybe Director Murphy or Hearings Manager Larson. I know that the presentation and the recording of the presentation will be posted online. And if you could just help clarify for me exactly where that will be. I'm assuming it'll be on the Financial Assurances Rulemaking webpage on COGCC's webpage, but I wasn't sure if it would also be posted on the COGCC YouTube video, because I'd like to share that with my colleagues at CDPHE as well.
Director Murphy?
That is a great question, but I might need to defer it to Ms. Amaro or Ms. Larson, as I think they were handling getting things posted.
I tell you what we can do. We can make sure that at the top part of our webpage, there is a link there to it tomorrow, and then we can keep it there for just a bit, and then we'll make sure it gets into the financial assurances rulemaking page as well. And I say that because Ms. Larson, I do not believe, is with us this evening. So.
Okay, thank you for that. That'll be very helpful. That's all I had.
Great. Hearings Manager Thomas, did Ms. Sharkan, Ms. Molina, Ms. Oliver, or Ms. Daughtery appear?
They have not.
Okay. Well, it is now 7:16. We're past the time for public comment, so I believe that we will call public comment concluded. Anything else for the good of the cause this evening? Great to have everybody with us. We had 40 some odd participants at one point. Good to hear from you. I think the additional time seemed to be helpful to folks. So we'll continue to do that during our monthly evening session and see how that goes. With that, I guess I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right. Good night, everybody. We will see you next week. We do not have a meeting on Friday. That's every other week. We'll be meeting next Wednesday, and we look forward to seeing you all then.